Hello, 8th graders. Today I'm going to do a read aloud of Mark Twain's A Cub Pilot. And if you are interested in following along in the text while I read this text aloud, that is absolutely okay, and you're welcome to do that with me today. You do not have to, however, this is not a requirement. But to find our lessons, especially for those of you that are new, remember that we use the Plan tab, and this tells us what we need to complete each and every day. So on Tuesday the 11th, our lesson was a test of courage. And within that, that's where we read a Cub Pilot. So to get to the lesson, we click on the More button. Now, it's come up a couple of times that some people are clicking on the assignment button and taking the quiz before the lesson. Of course, we're not going to do very well in the quiz if we don't do the lesson first. So remember that anything with a timestamp after it, that's an assignment, but it goes with whatever lesson is listed here. So make sure you're completing the lesson first before you take the quiz or do the assignment that goes along with it, okay? So when we go to our lessons, what you're going to see here, it's going to look a little bit different. I'm in teacher view, and so you're going to be in student view, and so you're going to see a taskbar that shows you kind of how far you've gone through the lesson, that kind of a thing. What I want to encourage you to do and make sure that you do for every lesson is start at the beginning and let the lesson walk you through all the way through to the end, and it will take you right to the assessment, okay? I've linked it separately just as a reminder for you to complete the assessment, but all you really need to do is step 1, start at the beginning of the lesson, use the arrows to go through the lesson, and it will walk you all the way through start to finish so that you don't miss anything and miss any of the content. If you're struggling on the quizzes, it might be that you're not completing some of these activities in the content, okay? Make sure you're doing those test questions when it asks you questions. It's a kind of a comprehension check. But if you don't know, if you get it wrong on the quick comprehension check in the lesson, make sure you're reading the little blurbs that they give you to help you understand the correct answer, because that's going to help you on the quizzes, okay? And then also on the unit tests that we take at the end of the unit, okay? So we're going to jump ahead. What I want you to do on your own is independently go through each of these sections. But in section 3, that's where you're actually going to be asked to read a Cub Pilot. So as you're clicking through, you won't jump ahead like I just did, but you're going to see this activity, and it's going to tell you to read A Cub Pilot by Mark Twain. There's also a reading graphic organizer, and these are really, really helpful. I strongly recommend that you open up the document and actually work through the graphic organizer while you read. I don't know if it's English teachers or what it is about us, but we love graphic organizers. That might be true of some of your English teachers in the past. So I really recommend that you use that as a guide while you're reading. But for today, we're going to go ahead and read A Cub Pilot. You can find this in your English book that you received from K-12, but you can also read it online, whichever is easier for you. When I click on this link, it's going to open into a new window, and I already have that available for us to save some time. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to do a read aloud of this text, but I would really like you to follow along, okay? To be able to really get a lot of meaning out of a text when someone's reading it to you, you need to be following along with the words as they're read. It helps you to learn new words, new vocabulary, but most importantly, really understand what you're reading, and that's going to be helpful for your quiz, okay? Okay, A Cub Pilot by Mark Twain. You may already know Mark Twain as the author of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Mark Twain was born in 1835 as Samuel Longhorn Clemens. In his autobiographical book, Life on the Mississippi, he wrote, "When I was a boy, there was but one permanent ambition among my comrades in our village on the west bank of the Mississippi River. That was to be a steamboatsman. Other ambitions faded out, each in its turn, but the ambition to be a steamboatsman always remained. When he was little more than 20 years old, Clemens achieved his boyhood ambition. He became a riverboat pilot. A riverboat pilot steers ships in and out of port, often through dangerous waters. In order to keep the ship from running aground, it's important for the pilot to remain constantly aware of the depth of the water. In Clemens's time, the water's depth was measured by throwing a line with a lead weight attached, which is why the men who read the line were called leadsmen. When a leadsman measured the depth of 2 fathoms, a fathom is 6 feet, he would cry out, "Mark Twain!" Twain is an old-fashioned word for 2. That cry gave Clemens the pen name by which he was known best. I didn't read that correctly. By which we know him best. The following selection is from Mark Twain's Life on the Mississippi. One thing that I want to note is whenever you see an underlined word, it's going to show you that you have a definition below. And whenever you are not familiar with that word, I strongly encourage you to take the moment to read through that definition, especially as we get into some challenging text this year. It will be very important. All right, let's read the text. There is one faculty, ability, or skill, which a pilot must incessantly, constantly, cultivate or develop. So that was a lot in a row. I'm going to go back and reread, just like a good reader would do. That was a lot of new information. There is one faculty which a pilot must incessantly cultivate until he has brought it to absolute perfection. Nothing short of perfection will do. That faculty is memory. He cannot stop with merely thinking a thing is so and so. He must know it, for this is one of the exact sciences. With what scorn a pilot was looked upon in the old times if he ever attempted, to deal in that feeble phrase, "I think," instead of the vigorous one, strong or powerful one, "I know." One cannot easily realize what a tremendous thing it is to know every trivial detail of 1,200 miles of river and know it with absolute exactness. If you will take the longest street in New York and travel up and down it, conning its features patiently until you know every house and window and lamppost and big and little sign by heart, and know them so accurately that you can instantly name the one you are abreast of when you are set down at random in that street in the middle of an inky black night, you will then have the tolerable notion of the amount and the exactness of a pilot's knowledge who carried the Mississippi River in his head. And then, if you will go on until you know every street crossing, the character, size, and position of the crossing stones, and the varying depth of mud in each of these numberless places, you will have some idea of what a pilot must know in order to keep a Mississippi steamer out of trouble. On this page, Mark Twain is comparing the street in New York City, a long street in New York City. He wants you to know every single detail, every window, every stone, all the depth of the mud. He's trying to show you how unbelievably challenging that would be. And he's making that comparison to show you how challenging it would be to memorize every detail of a Mississippi River for a steamboat pilot. Page 10. Next, if you will take half the signs in that street and change their places once a month and still manage to know their new positions accurately on dark nights and keep up with these repeated changes without making any mistakes, you will understand what is required of a pilot's peerless memory by the fickle Mississippi. I think a pilot's memory is about the most wonderful thing in the world. To know the Old and New Testament by heart and be able to recite them glibly forward and backward, or begin at random anywhere in the book and recite both ways and never trip or make a mistake, is no extravagant mass of knowledge, and no meaningless faculty compared to a pilot's mass knowledge of the Mississippi and his marvelous faculty in the handling of it. I make this comparison deliberately, and believing I am not expanding the truth when I do it. Many will think my figure too strong, but pilots will not. So he's making another comparison here now to the Bible, the Old and New Testament, and he's saying someone who can recite the whole Bible backward and forward might know exactly what you would need to know or be able to memorize about the Mississippi River. So it's just another comparison. A pilot must have a memory, but there are two higher qualities which he must also have. He must have a good and quick judgment and decision, and a cool, calm courage that no peril can shake. Give a man the merest trifle. Good readers, when they recognize a mistake, they're going to go back and reread that section. Given a man, no, again, good readers, go back. Give a man the merest trifle or pluck to start with, and by the time he has become a pilot, he cannot be unmanned by any danger a steamboat can get into. But one cannot quite say the name for judgment. Judgment is a matter of brains, and a man must start with a good stock of that article, good amount of brains, or he will never succeed as a pilot. The growth of courage in a pilot house is steady all the time, but it does not reach a high and satisfactory condition. Okay, page 11. I stopped in the middle of a sentence. I'm going to go back. Good readers, go back. The growth of courage in the pilot house is steady all the time, but it does not reach a high and satisfactory condition until some time after the young pilot has been standing his own watch alone and under the staggering weight of all the responsibilities connected with the position. When the apprentice has become pretty thoroughly acquainted with the river, he goes clattering along so fearlessly with his steamboat night or day that he presently begins to imagine that it is his courage that animates him. But the first time the pilot steps out and leaves him to his own devices, he finds out it was the other man's courage. And I added the word courage just to help with understanding. What he's saying here is that as an apprentice is someone who studies under someone who really knows what they're doing. So an apprentice studies under the real pilot to learn the Mississippi River like he's talking about here. And he's saying as an apprentice you feel courageous that you know the river. But as soon as that pilot leaves, all of a sudden you don't feel that courage, and you realize the courage wasn't yours alone. It was actually the pilot's courage, and now you're on your own and you're a little bit scared. Okay, back here, he discovers that the article has been left out of his own cargo altogether. The whole river is bristling with dangers in a moment. He is not prepared for them. He does not know how to meet them. All his knowledge forsakes him, and within 15 minutes he is as white as a sheet and scared almost to death. Therefore pilots wisely train these cubs by various strategic tricks to look danger in the face a little more calmly. A favorite way of theirs is to play a friendly swindle upon the candidate. Okay, a swindle is a trick. Mr. Bixby, my chief, served me in this fashion once, and for years afterward I used to blush, even in my sleep, when I think of it. I became a good steersman, so good, indeed, that I had all the work to do on our watch night and day. Mr. Bixby seldom made a suggestion to me. All he ever did was take the wheel on particularly bad nights or in particularly bad crossings, land the boat when she needed to be landed, play gentleman of leisure 9/10 of the watch, which means he was hanging out, casually letting Mark Twain do the work. And back here, and collect the wages. The lower river was about bank full, and if anybody had questioned my ability to run any crossings between, I'm not sure how to say this, Cario, it's a city in Illinois, and New Orleans, without help or instruction, I should have felt irreparably hurt. Okay, irreparably is irreversibly or beyond repair, so he would have been very, very hurt is what this means. Okay, page 12. The idea of being afraid of any crossing in the lot in the daytime was a thing too preposterous for contemplation. Well, one matchless summer day, I was bowling down the bend above Island 66, brimful of self-conceit and carrying my nose high as a giraffe's, when Mr. Bixby said, Okay, before we get to that, carrying my nose as high as a giraffe's, what a beautiful simile. But that just means if you have your nose up in the air, you're really confident. Okay, maybe even a little bit stuck up. So he's feeling very confident the moment when Mr. Bixby says, "I am going below a while. I suppose you know the next crossing?" This was almost an affront. Okay, or like, well, let's see, affront, an insult. This was almost an affront. It was about the plainest and simplest crossing in the whole river. One couldn't come to any harm whether he ran it right or not. And as for depth, there never had been any bottom there. I knew this perfectly well. Know how to run it? Why, I can run it with my eyes shut. How much water is there in it? Well, that's an odd question. I couldn't get bottom there with a church steeple. I couldn't get bottom there with a church steeple. Interesting way to say this. A church steeple, especially in this time, was usually very, very, very tall. So he's saying it should be very, very deep here. You think so, do you? The very tone of his question shook my confidence. That was what Mr. Bixby was expecting. He left without saying anything more. I began to imagine all sorts of things. Mr. Bixby, unknown to me, of course, sent somebody down to the forecastle. That's a new word for me. Forecastle, a section in the upper deck of the ship. Mr. Bixby, unknown to me, of course, sent somebody down to the forecastle with some mysterious instructions to the leadsman. Another messenger was sent to whisper among the officers, and then Mr. Bixby went into hiding behind a smokestack where he could observe results. Presently the captain stepped out on the hurricane deck. Next the chief mate appeared, then a clerk. So he's setting the stage of something to come. And hopefully you're getting some predictions that this trick is about to happen, that the captain here is about to kind of trick our protagonist, right, Mark Twain? Let's see what happens. Every moment or two a straggler was added to my audience, and before I got to the head of the island I had 15 or 20 people assembled down there under my nose. I began to wonder what the trouble was. As I started across, the captain glanced aloft at me and said, with a sham uneasiness in his voice, a fake or pretended uneasiness in his voice. So again, that's giving you some predictions to make about what's going to happen. "Where is Mr. Bixby?" "Gone below, sir." But that did the business for me. My imagination began to construct dangers out of nothing, and they multiplied faster than I could keep run of them. All at once I imagined my shoal water ahead. All at once I imagined I saw shoal water ahead. Shoal. Shallow. Okay. All at once I imagined I saw shallow water ahead. The wave of coward agony that surged through me then came near dislocating every joint in me. All my confidence in that crossing vanished. I seized the bell rope, dropped it, ashamed, seized it again, dropped it once more, clutching it trembly once again, and pulled it so feebly that I could hardly hear the stroke myself. Captain and mate sang out instantly, and both together, "Starboard lead there, and quick about it!" Starboard. When looking forward to the right of the ship. Okay, so look to the right. "And quick about it!" This was another shock. I began to climb the wheel like a squirrel, but I would hardly get the boat started to port before I would see new dangers on that side, and away I would spin to the other, only to find perils accumulating to starboard, and be crazy to get to port again. Then came the leadsman's sepulchral. That's a new word. Sepulchral cry. Take note of how I'm attempting to sound out the word. Right? Sepulchral cry. And then I'm going to go down here and I'm going to look at what it means, because it's a new word. Low and hollow in tone, suggestive of a grave or burial. Wow. Okay. So this can kind of give you an idea of the tone here, right? Wow. This is a deep, scary, somber cry out. Okay, so what we have going on here is a lot of new language, but we also have this situation happening where we have our new pilot who's scared. Okay, he's kind of freaking out a little bit, and he's starting to leer the boat back and forth across the river, and he'll go one way, but he'll see dangers that aren't really there. We know that, but he doesn't at the time, right? So then he'll start to veer it back the other way, and he'll see dangers over that way. So he's kind of like maneuvering this boat back and forth down the river. Okay. So we hear this cry out from the leadsman. Remember, the leadsman is the one who measures the depth of the river. Okay. Deep 4. I don't know what that means. I think I want to read on to find out. Deep 4. Page 14. Deep 4 in a bottomless crossing. The terror of it took my breath away. Ma'ark 3, Ma'ark 3, quarter less 3, half Twain. This was frightful. I seized the bell ropes and stopped the engines. Quarter Twain, Mark Twain. I was helpless. I did not know what in the world to do. I was quaking from head to foot, and I could have hung my hat on my eyes. They stuck out so far. I could have hung my hat on my eyes. They stung out so far. This just means his eyes are like bulging out of his head so far that maybe a hat could sit on it. What a beautiful way to say that. Quarter less Twain, 9.5. We were drawing 9. My hands were in a nervous flutter. I could not ring a bell intelligibly with them. I flew to the speaking tube and shouted to the engineer, "Oh, Ben, if you love me, back her! Quick, Ben! Oh, back the immortal soul of her!" Her being the boat. He wants to back the boat up. I heard the door close gently. I looked around, and there stood Mr. Bixby, smiling a bland, sweet smile. Then the audience on the hurricane deck sent up a thunder gust of humiliating laughter. I saw it all now and felt meaner than the meanest man in human history. I laid in the lead, set the boat in her marks, came ahead on the engine, and said, "It was a fine trick to play on an orphan, wasn't it? I suppose I'll never hear the last of how I was stupid enough to heave the lead at the head of the 66. This is just the location. Well, no, you won't, maybe. In fact, I hope you won't, for I want you to learn something by that experience. Didn't you know that there was no bottom in that crossing? Yes, I did, sir. Very well, then. You shouldn't have allowed me or anybody else to shake your confidence in that knowledge. Try to remember that. And another thing, when you get into a dangerous place, don't turn coward. That isn't going to help matters any. It was a good enough lesson, but learned the hard way. Yet, about the hardest part of it was that for months I so often had to hear a phrase which I conceived a particular distaste for. It was, "Oh, Ben, if you love me, back her." And this just means that everybody continued to tease him for this phrase that he said when he was in his depths of despair. So, now that we've had a chance to read through the text and understand it a little better, this is where you would come back to our lesson and you would move forward, okay? You might take a time to fill out this reading graphic organizer, or if you are reading this independently, you're stopping as you read to fill out this graphic organizer. And then you, of course, just use these arrow buttons to move yourself to the next section. So, we've already here moved on to section 4. Now, this is where I want to just mention, this is really, really important. It's really important that you're taking the time to actually go through and check your understanding, okay? So if you read through, the author makes the comparison between memorizing the entire Bible and memorizing the Mississippi to show, okay? I'm going to choose in this case the wrong answer, how important courage is to a pilot. And then I'm going to check my answer. Okay, oops. Now what I want to do here is I need to recognize why I didn't get this right so that I'm prepared for my quizzes and my assessments. So I'm going to read through here and see what it's saying to me, and then I'm going to try again. And I'm going to try again until I do get it right, okay? And then I'm going to check until I have the correct answer. And I'm going to use these arrows to go on to the next question. This is going to be really important in helping you make sure that you understand before you go take the quizzes and the assessments. Okay? If you have any questions as you go through this lesson or any lesson, remember that you can reach out to me and we can do a read aloud like this together in a session, or I can prepare a video like this as well for you. So that's all I have for you in this video. Hopefully it was helpful for you as you read through Mark Twain's Cub Pilot. Take care, everybody.